So you want to read some fantasy books, you want to travel through the ancient forests, to the highest mountains, but perhaps you don't know where to start. And there are so many subgenres within the fantasy umbrella. It is one of the best parts about fantasy is there are so many different types of stories within fantasy. So today I made the ultimate beginner's guide to reading fantasy. This covers 6 different categories with multiple recommendations, so you have the best chance of finding a fantasy book that will work for you. The first category I want to cover is just modern day fantasy. If you want to jump immediately in to the most up-to-date fantasy and kind of get a feel for how more of the modern day fantasy feels like, these are some books to think about checking out. The first book I want to recommend is probably the most recommended book for beginners getting into modern day fantasy, and that is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson is a fantasy novel set in a world ruled by a tyrannical, immortal emperor, where ash falls from the sky and mist cloaks the night. A young street thief named Vin discovers she has powerful magical abilities and joins a crew planning to overthrow the oppressive regime using allomancy, a metal-based magic system. This is a fantastic place to start because it is so easy to read and fall into while still being very deep and interesting. Sanderson is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, high epic fantasy writer of modern day, and he's really known for his accessible prose, fantastic fantasy world building, and Mistborn is his most popular series. It's a fantastic taste of modern day fantasy. Now, the only thing that might put some people off is the books are quite long. They are over 700 pages, which is very uncommon out with the fantasy genre. However, I do want to hark back to the fact that his prose style, his writing style is really easy to read, and you will fly through these books. Next on up, we have a book that just came out last year, so this is fresh off the press, very new, and the sequel is coming out towards the end of this year, and that is The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan. Also, just as a side note, how cool is this cover art by Jeff Brown? Beautiful. The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan is a fast-paced epic fantasy debut following Lucan Gardova, a disgraced nobleman turned gambler who embarks on a perilous quest when his estranged father is found murdered under mysterious circumstances. His search for answers leads him to Sophrona, a treacherous city of merchant princes and dark conspiracies. There, he teams up with the street-smart Flea to uncover a web of ancient secrets, supernatural threats, and political betrayal. The Silver Blood Promise does so much of what I love about fantasy, this sort of ancient society, civilization element. There's some weird magic stuff going on with these magical items, ancient artifacts, but the crux of the story, we have this dynamic between Luke Gardova and this street urchin called Flea, and their banter kind of brings some levity to this murder mystery that unfolds over the narrative. Next on up, we have Shadow of the Gods. The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne is a gritty, Norse-inspired epic fantasy set centuries after a cataclysmic war among the gods. This story follows 3 protagonists: a huntress, a retired warrior seeking to find her missing son, a shield maiden craving battle glory, and a freed thrall on a quest for vengeance. They all converge in a brutal land where bones of ancient gods bestow dark powers. This is a fantastic book if you're looking for a very brutal Viking-esque story in a fantasy world. It does have a lot of Norse-inspired elements, so if you're into Norse mythology, you will see a lot of similarities in the world building there. Next on up, we have The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding. The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding is a classic epic fantasy about 2 teenage friends whose lives are upended when their occupied homeland is thrown into rebellion. Framed as traitors, they flee into a dangerous world and join a band of rebels seeking a legendary sword, the Ember Blade, believed to unite the people and ignite a revolution against their conquerors. If you want that classic fantasy feeling but you want a more modernized approach, definitely check out The Ember Blade. It's very similar to Lord of the Rings, but it is a lot less dense in the prose style. It's a lot more modernized. Or if you have read Lord of the Rings and you just want to see a modern interpretation of a quest fantasy, a magical item, while still very much being its own thing, definitely check out The Ember Blade. Next up, we have The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong is a gripping fantasy set in the militaristic nation of Kaigen, where disciplined warriors wield elemental martial arts. storms. When a deadly invasion shatters the peace, a seemingly ordinary mother must rise to master her lethal heritage and embrace her past to protect her family and homeland. This is an Asian-inspired fantasy book. It is a standalone, so if you want to just kind of read one book and kind of be done with it, this is a really, really good option. Next on up, we have The Will of the Many. The Will of the Many by James Islington is an epic fantasy set in the Catalan Republic, where citizens must cede their life force to higher classes, empowering an elite few. Orphan Vis Telemus infiltrates the prestigious Catalan Academy, determined to uncover the truth behind his family's massacre and expose the hidden conspiracies within the ruling hierarchy. This is a Roman-inspired fantasy book. The sequel is also coming out this year. Super quick interlude, because this video is sponsored by myself. If you've been part of the channel for a while, I did do a run of merch a year and a half ago. Well, we have new merch. It is Dragon Bone and Dragon Plate. And I am so happy with how these turned out. The rough idea was it was kind of like an active wear, throw on top while you're going to the gym, or if you're just at home and you want to read. So that's why the dragon plate design does have a dragon holding weight plates, which is kind of where the wordplay comes in. But there's also the dragon bone design, so it's not just for people who want to show off their fantasy lovingness when they go to the gym. So this will only be available until August 5th, so if you do want one of the designs that has been on screen, that is linked in the description below. The second category is dark fantasy. If you're perhaps coming from horror, or you want just something darker with your fantasy, definitely check out these books. Probably the most iconic grimdark in modern day fantasy is The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie is a gritty, character-driven fantasy novel that follows a barbarian warrior, a crippled torturer, and an arrogant nobleman as their fates intertwine in a corrupt, war-torn world. It's the first book in the First Law trilogy blending dark humor, brutal violence, and political intrigue. Joe Abercrombie is a master of having this very dark story while still having these funny elements to it. The First Law is iconic in the modern day fantasy space. However, I would also recommend, perhaps if you prefer a more funny, slightly less dark story, from Joe Abercrombie called The Devils. The Devils follows Brother Diaz, a devout priest unexpectedly appointed to lead a brutal band of monsters. A werewolf, vampire, necromancer, elf, and more are tasked with escorting a thief turned empress across a plague-ravaged medieval Europe to secure the throne of Troy. So if you're into dark but you do want more of that humor element, slightly less of the dark, definitely check out The Devils. Next up, we have The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan is a gripping epic fantasy meets legal thriller that follows Sir Conrad von Volt, an emperor's justice, wielding sword and sorcery with a truth-compelling voice and necromancy, alongside his young clerk, Helena Sedanka. What begins as an investigation into a provincial murder spirals into conspiracy threatening the Empire's foundations, forcing them to confront the true cost of justice and loyalty. This is a great one if you want to jump into more dark fantasy with horror elements. However, it also has this legal thriller side to it as well, so if you do read murder mysteries, this might also be up your street. And the last book I want to include in the dark category is Harbinger of Justice, which is my book. Full transparency, so this is a bit of a cop-out answer given its very biased source. However, I do think it would be a good beginner's fantasy book into the darker side of fantasy. Harbinger of Justice by Andrew Watson is a dark, epic fantasy set in the desert city of Yontar. It follows Naya, a desperate street urchin coerced into a secret project to save her own mother, and Rai, a mercenary whose sentient shadow harbors ancient power. Their paths converge as they uncover a brewing rebellion and an eldritch conspiracy that threatens to engulf their world. This takes inspiration from ancient Egyptian mythology. It also has blood magic and shadow magic, and some humor elements mixed in with the darker parts too. Next on up, we have classic fantasy. Now, classic fantasy very much has its own writing style that's very of the time. First up, we have the icon that is The Hobbit. The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien is a classic fantasy adventure. This tale follows Bilbo Baggins, a reluctant hobbit who joins a group of dwarves on a quest to reclaim their stolen homeland from the dragon Smaug. The Hobbit is such a good place to start because it is iconic in the fantasy space, but as well as this, it is a relatively short novel. This edition here is only 300 pages long, and it also is very easy to read despite the fact that it was published in the 30s, I think, right? Yes, 1937. Despite the fact it was published in the 30s, it's still very easy to read. One of the later categories is for younger readers, and I was tempted to put this one in it, but I decided to put it in classics. However, this does work for younger readers as well, so if you are a young adult and you want to get into fantasy, definitely check out The Hobbit. Now this next one comes with a bit of an asterisk, because I am going to recommend The Lord of the Rings. However, this book can get a little description heavy, and the prose is very much of the time. As well as this, it's not a short read. The Lord of the Rings is quite a chunky book. However, it is the icon of fantasy, and I think if you have watched the films, I do highly recommend checking out the book. I think it will be a familiar story which will make it easier to get into. It's just iconic. Who doesn't love Lord of the Rings? But don't be put off if you do read it and it doesn't work for you. Do try other fantasy books as well. Next up, we have The Sword of Shannara. The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks follows Shia Omsford, a half-elf who discovers he's the only one who can wield a magical sword to defeat the dark warlock Brona. Joined by allies, Shia embarks on a perilous quest through a post-apocalyptic fantasy world to save the Four Lands from destruction. This is another one that's just classic fantasy. It is compared a lot to Lord of the Rings as well as Wheel of Time. We have this chosen one going on a quest, magical item, all the classic tropes that you love to see. Next up, we have A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. A Wizard of Earthsea follows Jed, a gifted boy who becomes a powerful wizard. His journey of mastering magic leads him to confront the shadow he unleashed. This is a Dragon Rider fantasy. Again, it is an icon of the fantasy genre, and it has dragon riders in it, which is always really, really cool. In a lot of ways, this was the book that created modern day dragon riding fantasy. So if you want to kind of see where it all began, definitely check out A Wizard of Earthsea. And also, what's really good about this one is it's under 200 pages, so it's a really short book. And last, but most certainly not least, the last book I want to recommend in this category is Guards by Terry Pratchett. Guards by Terry Pratchett is a comedic fantasy in which the inept Night Watch, led by the cynical Captain Vimes, must stop a secret society that summons a dragon to take over the city. With the help of a clever new recruit and an unlikely hero, they battle chaos with wit and reluctant bravery. If you want those classic fantasy vibes, but you also kind of want some humor in it, definitely check out Terry Pratchett. And Terry Pratchett writes a lot of different books that are kind of all standalones. However, there are some series built into his world. They are all connected to the same world. However, most people recommend starting with Guards. And again, the good thing is you can read this as a standalone. The next category that I thought could be really useful for recommendations for readers wanting to come into fantasy is more of a thriller mystery category. So whether you have already read a bunch of thriller books, or if it's just a genre that you really, really like, I thought it'd be good to have some fantasy, thriller, murder mystery type stories for you to check out. And the first one I want to recommend is A Master of Djinn. A Master of Djinn by P. Jelly Clark is a steampunk mystery fantasy set in an alternate history, 1912 Cairo, where magic and djinn coexist with modern technology. Agent Fatima of the Ministry of Alchemy, Enchantment and Supernatural Entities must unravel a deadly conspiracy tied to ancient powers and a false prophet threatening the balance of the magical world. I love this book, but I also think it's a really good introduction because it's really fast-paced. It draws you through the narrative, and it still has this alternate history type setup, so it is kind of tied to our world, but with magical elements put on top of that as well. Next up, we have Ninth House by Leah Bardugo. Ninth House by Leah Bardugo follows Alex Stern, a troubled young woman who is given a second chance in exchange for monitoring the university's secret societies that practice dark magic. As she investigates a murder linked to these occult groups, Alex uncovers dangerous secrets and her own hidden powers. This one's slightly more on the dark side. It does have this kind of almost horror-like elements with this thriller and murder mystery. It's really good, highly recommend. However, if you're looking for something a little bit more high fantasy than some of these urban fantasy alternate history type setups, we have The Tainted Cup. The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett is a fantasy murder mystery set in a world of bioengineered magic, where a brilliant investigator and her uniquely modified assistant must solve a bizarre assassination involving a tree growing through a corpse. As they dig deeper, they uncover a conspiracy that threatens the entire empire. This is a completely brand new world. It's this really bizarre biomutagenic magic system, and at the heart of it we have this murder mystery. However, if you're not really that into murder mysteries but you do still want kind of more thriller aspects, a good modern day fantasy is Jade City. Jade City by Fonda Lee is a gritty urban fantasy where powerful families in the city of Janloon fight for control over jade, a magical substance that grants enhanced ability. As tensions escalate between rival clans, honor, loyalty, and power collide in a brutal struggle that tests the bonds of blood and family. This is like a Godfather-esque fantasy story where we have these battling clans over this very rare material called jade that gives them added abilities. And it all revolves around this one family called the Call family. The next category is specifically for gamers or those who are really into anime, and that is LitRPG. These are books that have more game-like mechanics, such as being able to level up skills for one's ability to do something, but this is all very much still in book form. I'm not hugely knowledgeable on this subgenre. I do really like what I have read, but there are 3 really big names that I think could be good introductions into this subgenre and just fantasy as a whole. Starting with Dungeon Crawler Carl. Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman is a darkly comedic, action-packed sci-fi fantasy series where Earth is turned into a deadly televised dungeon crawl by alien overlords. Carl, one of the few survivors, battles monsters, traps, and twisted challenges alongside his snarky cat companion, Princess Donut, all while trying to stay alive and beat the game. Personally, this is one of my favorite series of all time and I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. It's really, really funny, but it's also pretty messed up and dark, so highly recommend checking it out. The next one is more for anime fans, and that is Cradle by Will White. Unsouled is the first book in the Cradle series by Will White, which is a fast-paced progression fantasy following Lyndon, a young man considered weak, who defies destiny by training in powerful sacred arts to save his homeland from looming doom. This is very Asian-inspired, it's very anime-esque. A lot of people who read it say it reads just like an anime. There are a lot of them, but they're very short books. And one of the other really big names in LitRPG is He Who Fights with Monsters. He Who Fights with Monsters by Shirtaloon is a high-octane LitRPG progression fantasy following sarcastic Aussie Jason Asano as he's hurled from Earth into a brutal magical world where every kill grants stats, loot, and power. So this is kind of a blend of the first 2. It's still very anime-esque sounding, however it does have more of this leveling system. And the last category for this video is for younger readers. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I do think Mistborn is really good for younger readers. It's not necessarily YA, but it has been marketed as YA, meaning young adult, which means it's just easy to read and very accessible. So that is a great choice if you're a younger reader. We've already gone over it, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but that one, and also The Hobbit, which I did mention earlier in the video, is a really good one for younger readers getting into fantasy. However, I also recommend Narnia by C.S. Lewis, again an iconic fantasy book. The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis is a classic fantasy series where children discover a magical world ruled by talking animals, ancient prophecies, and the noble lion, Aslan. Across 7 books, they fight evil, grow in character, and explore themes of faith, sacrifice, and redemption. I think most people have heard about Narnia, and who doesn't want to climb into a wardrobe and find a magical world on the other side? Next on up, we have another dragon riding fantasy with Eragon. Eragon tells the story of a farm boy who discovers a mysterious dragon egg, thrusting him into a world of magic, ancient powers, and rebellion. As the last of the Dragon Riders, he must rise to challenge an evil empire and uncover his true destiny. Again, this is just another one that hits all the classic fantasy tropes, and it's just a really good time. If you're looking for a more modern fantasy for younger readers, I highly recommend Spin of Fate. Spin of Fate by A.A. Vora is a YA fantasy set in a world shaped by tyrannic law, a cosmic karma system that segregates souls across 4 realms based on moral weight. When Aina, born in the harshest realm, paradoxically ascends to a higher one, she joins a rebel group aiming to challenge the rigid system. I really enjoyed this book. It reminded me a lot of Percy Jackson, so if that's a book that you've already read, this is another really good one in that sort of style. Now, of course, there's going to be books that I didn't include on this list that will also work as an entry into fantasy, so if you have any, please drop them down in the comments below. It's really difficult to explain until you start reading fantasy just how insanely different fantasy books can be. The umbrella term of fantasy just encapsulates so much, so definitely give a couple books a try before you start writing off fantasy for you. But hopefully you'll find something on this list that you will enjoy. Thank you very much for watching. I can hear my cat meowing outside. You have a cat flap.